All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We still got some folks joining, but let's start talking tax compliance. Thank you so much all for being here today and joining our webinar. This webinar is brought to you by Volusion and Avalara. We're very excited to be bringing you this with the Volusion team. Just a couple of housekeeping items to go through before we get started today. The first of which is that we will be recording today's presentation. So if you ever want to come back and revisit anything that you learned today or share it with a colleague, that link will be going out within the next 24 hours. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. And we also have set some time aside at the end of the webinar for a Q&A. So if you have any questions at all during the webinar, there's a Q&A box down at the bottom. You can submit your question. We're going to do our best to get to all the questions today. If we don't have time for all the questions, we are going to be following up via email. So even if we're cutting short close to the end of the webinar, please go ahead and submit those questions. We will make sure that we get you some answers there. And then finally, if you have any questions afterwards, Darren and Makia would be happy to chat with you and talk a little bit more, or you can reach out to your Volusion rep to get a little bit more info about Avalara. But with that, let's get into how we can simplify tax compliance for highly regulated markets. And today's speakers are Darren Burt and Makia K. Carley, and they are going to take us through how Avalara can help simplify tax compliance and some common pitfalls to avoid.
Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Darren. It's a pleasure to be with you today. We're going to do some fun, exciting things and talk about tax compliance today. I know it's everyone's favorite topic, and what better day to do it than on election day. My name is Darren Burt. I'll be one of your presenters today. I'm the partner manager for the Volusion Avalara partnership, and Makia, my amazing colleague, and David are also with us. You just heard from David, and Makia is going to be joining me too. To go through this presentation with you guys today, just trying to go over some ways we can simplify the tax compliance process for your business. We all know how complicated sales, especially sales and use tax in the United States, can be. So we're going to go through some high-level overview of that landscape, show you guys some different things about what to keep an eye on, just some suggestions and educational material and different statistics we can go through, and then also go through a little bit of how Avalara through Volusion can help. Just want to special shout out to the whole Volusion team. Avalara as a company has been around for 22 years. We've always gone to market through our partners. It's been our strategy. Volusion's been an amazing partner of ours for years, and we really appreciate everything, and especially this opportunity today to present to you all. A couple different ways I know David alluded to in the beginning that you can get in touch with us. Makia today during the presentation is going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions or want to connect with us later, please feel free to pose a question in there. She'll respond to you as I'm going through the deck, and then we'd be happy to set up time afterwards. The other option is always you can reach out to your Volusion team member, and they can get us connected after the presentation to take a deeper dive and get a little bit more granular as far as the information and how it pertains specifically to your business. Just a disclaimer as far as throwing this up on the screen here for a second, we are not tax attorneys or cannot give legal tax advice. We are a software company that manages tax compliance process for you. So this is intended for informational purposes only. Our safe harbor statement, and we're going to jump right into it here. This is our agenda for the next probably 35 minutes. We're going to go over the complexity of tax compliance, just go over the landscape and show you common things that, that businesses have to deal with. Knowing your nexus will be the next thing. What is nexus? How does it pertain to me and my business? And what are things I need to look out for? Then we're going to get into exemption certificate management. Just go through that process and give you a little bit more information there. And then calculating the right sales tax amount. We're going to touch a little bit on consumer use tax, and then at the end go over the filing returns or remitting tax. Now, the one thing I wanted to mention too is with part of this presentation, we decided to have a slight focus on highly regulated industries, right? So beverage alcohol, tobacco, excise, energy, fuel, all those things are things that Avalara can help through Volusion, and through the connector that Volusion built and maintains into our system. We can help simplify that process for you. Now, not getting compliance right, is can be costly and damaging to a business in any industry. We just wanted to make it known and focus on a little bit on some specific industries to let you all know that we can help in those areas as well. First up, the complexity of tax compliance. So not just calculations with sales and use tax, not just, figuring out the right rate. There's a lot of things to it that businesses have to contend with. Doing the actual research, right? That's one of the biggest aspects of making sure that the business is doing everything correctly, getting the right rates, the right jurisdictions. A lot of time spent having to manage that process, just having to make sure we're looking up the right things. Where are you getting the data from? Is it a trusted source? How confident are you in that data? Whether it's pieces of your exemption certificates, whether it's the calculations, whether it's the varying taxability, maybe the product is taxable in one state, maybe it's not in another. And then filing returns. Filing returns is going to be one of the most time-consuming things for an accounting department or your business. There's different jurisdictions, there's different filing schedules, different payment methods, paper versus online. A lot of things go into the returns process that can make it complex and time-consuming for your business. And then we have things like registrations, licenses, property taxes. These are all things that we have solutions for. We started as a company just doing in the initial stages, doing calculations is how we started with our AvidTax engine. Now we have many different solutions in place to where we're a full end-to-end compliance suite that we can offer many different things. And it all depends on what your business is having to contend with. My colleague Makia and I talk to Volusion clients all the time. Over the years that we've had the partnership with Volusion, we've been able to help a great many number of clients really just simplify this process. Like there's a real cost to not getting things right with compliance. So we're able to streamline that process, simplify it for you, and just make it easier. So the high reg industry, right? We talked about this a little bit. I mentioned compliance is costly, and like I said, it's costly in any industry. Like it's not a nice to have, it's a must have. Whether you're doing this manually, whether you have an automated solution like Avalara in place, whatever you're doing to manage your compliance, it's got to be right, because there's real repercussions to not doing it right. The high regulation industries that I mentioned earlier, they just have a complex web of different federal, state, county, and city regulations. And there's even more severe penalties for not being compliant. There's a real delayed time to market, which what does that mean? That means your customers being affected. So anything that is delaying that process, delaying the sales, delaying the shipment, because you're not staying compliant with the things you need to, is going to affect that customer. And then overhead, we talk about at Avalara, we talk about overhead, just the time spent managing your compliance, looking things up, making sure everything's right, double checking everything, validating everything, storing it. It puts a strain on thin resources, and essentially what it comes down to is it's your staff is spending time on non-revenue generating tasks, right? So they could be focusing their areas on other parts of the business, while an automated solution like Avalara through Volusion can help that process and free up that time. And then just the ever-changing regulations are just very difficult overall to keep up with, whether it's this industry, a different high reg industry, or just anything.
And I'll add that in 2022 we saw that there was over 130,000 tax law and tax rate changes. So again, the ever-changing rules is very difficult to keep up with. In 2023, it was just under 100,000 changes. So when you think about that and the resources that you have and having to keep up with updating those rates and those laws within your system, it is quite difficult to do that. And so what we present is more of a live determination with our solutions. So just kind of keeping that in mind, because again, if you're doing the research yourself, you're sitting with static rules and rates, and having to keep up with that can be cumbersome.
Yeah, great call out. Thanks, Makia. That's I do a lot of presenting in my job, in my day job, and that's one of the trivia questions I always do when I'm presenting is the number of tax law changes in the US in a given year. And it's high. It's a very high number that very few people guess. But yeah,
Mhm.
thanks, Makia. So this is the slide just shows the e-commerce sales boom in alcohol over the past couple years, $2.5 billion increase. And we all know that this is the way, especially after COVID, that things are trending in terms of, e-commerce, omni-channel sales, just different revenue streams companies are looking for. All right. So challenge number one we're going to talk about is Nexus. What is Nexus, right? Keep hearing this term, like Nexus refers in the sales tax world refers to your obligation to a jurisdiction to get registered, start collecting tax, and then remitting that tax back to that correct jurisdiction. Now, this is a very long list of all these different activities or workflow processes that will trigger that obligation or that nexus to get registered in a certain state or jurisdiction. Most people are obviously aware of physical nexus. You have whether you own or lease real property in that state, or you're doing business in those states, but that physical nexus is kind of the obvious one. But you can see some different things on here like drop shipping, trade shows, paying commissions to resellers, any kind of affiliates, and other even things like hosted data centers can trigger nexus, or having field sales or service staff if they're traveling to a trade show and they're operating in that state. Guess what? You could possibly be triggering nexus for that state. Now, one thing you're going to hear a lot about, if you haven't already, which most people have, but in the past 4 to 7 years, the big talk has been about economic nexus, right? So what's economic nexus? And I'm going to pull this map of the US up here as I go through it. Years ago, I think it was 7 years ago, the state of South Dakota filed lawsuit against Wayfair for selling goods into their state. They said they weren't charging tax on it and they wanted their revenue from those sales. So I went to the Supreme Court and they actually sided with the state of South Dakota. So what that did is it brought about economic nexus laws. Now you see 5 or 6 different colors here, which just shows you the complexity of it. Every state's different, but every state has these thresholds where a business is, if they're selling remotely selling goods into that state, it counts towards that threshold. Now, one thing that makes it even more complex is that some states do gross sales, some do taxable sales. So you could be selling a certain amount of goods into a state, could be under that threshold, just crossing over the threshold, but most of the sales are non-taxable. Some states factor in these gross receipts. So that could take you over that threshold, even though they were non-taxable sales. So all these things make it even more complex. As you can see, every state has different, whether it's dollar amounts, some are dollar and transactions. But a common one is $100,000. So what that does is, like I said, if a business is selling into a state, you're not registered in that state. When you're under that state and that threshold in sales, not collecting sales tax, once you hit that threshold, that's when the state's going to require you to register in that state. All the goods sold and invoices that are taxable need to be applied taxes on the invoice collected. And then all that data needs to be aggregated at the end and put into the returns and then file and remit back to the state. So we offer what's called a sales tax risk assessment through our partnership with Volusion. What this does, every state requires businesses to register and collect if their volume is high enough, basically, like what I went through on that last slide. So Avalara's sales tax risk assessment can help you figure out where you might be on the hook for sales tax, where the company creates nexus that we just talked about, when the company creates nexus, what products and services are they selling into the state in different jurisdictions, and what's their taxability. Of course, that varies from state to state in different jurisdictions, like we just mentioned. What if the liability? It'll go through all the liabilities. So this is something we can offer. What we usually recommend doing is, this is a high level overview of a lot of information. We realize that, so we try to give that high level overview and then just connect with anyone who wants more information after. There's many different ways, like we said earlier. Your Volusion rep, Makia, is monitoring the chat right now. If you want to connect with her, she does these risk assessments for Volusion clients. Now, whether you choose the premium sales tax risk assessment or just consult with Makia about your certain obligations and situation and how you're managing it today, and just looking for some more information, we're happy to do that, obviously, as well. She talks to Volusion clients every week about this, so we're happy to connect on that level too.
Yes, please reach out if you guys have any questions. We can always just take a quick look and see if a proper Nexus study is necessary or not, and then we'll guide you from there.
Yes. All right, challenge number 2 is exemption certificate management. This is a very important piece. Exemption failed or improper exemption certificates when an auditors come in is oftentimes the number one reason that companies will fail an audit, which is not a very well-known fact. And whether they're expired, they're not filled out properly, and just no one went through and validated them, missing some information, missing a line item. There's many different reasons why. So anytime an invoice and goods are sold and an invoice is generated, if a business, for whatever reason, whether they're a reseller, whether it's military, hospital, nonprofit, many different reasons of business that you're selling to, will tell you they're tax exempt and they do not want sales tax, or sales tax should not be applied to that invoice. Every time that happens, you have to have the burden of proof is on your business, that you have to have a document, a certificate of exemption on file, explaining, proving why that business that you sold to did not have tax on the invoice. So again, the burden of proof is on the business to do that. And managing these exemption certificates, whether you're doing them manually in a filing cabinet, maybe there's a digital file in Excel or whatever it is you guys are using, that manual process can be very time consuming on the business. There's a real risk to not doing it correctly. There's a effect on the customer as well, right? So if it's not done correctly up front, the time of the invoice being generated, and you have to go back to the customer and look for that money to be collected, or the business has to eat that cost. All right. So we call it our ECM, which is exemption certificate management software. Again, through Volusion is one of the things that we offer to help businesses manage this process and make it a little bit easier. It automates all the workflows. It ensures the accuracy. It's got built-in intelligence to ensure certificates are accurate, valid, and up to date, and it stores them for you. And it handles any sales channel. Help customers become digital first by turning paper into digital files. It makes it much easier, as we all know, excuse me, to manage that process. So requesting certificates, we have a web portal that's called our Cert Express, which is where your clients can fill out and send in the proper certificate to be exempt from a sale from you guys. So it makes it a lot easier. Helps as far as outreach that you and the business have to do to customers if we're digitally handling that for you. It'll validate all the certificates. So as they fill it out on the Cert Express web portal, it validates them to make sure everything is stored, everything's filled out properly. Make sure it's up to date, no information is missing. So again, just automates that whole workflow. And then Avalara, depending on the services you sign up for, one thing we do offer is to do campaigns and reach out to customers. So think about it from, again, a customer service standpoint. It's just a much easier automated workflow and process for us to be in real time, recognizing that it's not that they're exempt, there's no certificate on file, and then we can reach out to the customer to request that certificate. Takes that burden off of the business, off of you guys, and having to do that and the time spent. All right, talk about the product taxability challenge again with exempt sales. This is an interesting slide, and keep in mind it's, I know we've talked about high regulated industries and some other different retail industries. These are just 6 different random examples throughout the country, different things that you can see depending on how the product is used, where the product's being used. It's a service, it's a product. It can affect that taxability and that varying taxability depending on what jurisdiction it is, what the product it is, and how the state deems that to be taxable. So even though some of these may not apply to you and your business and what you're selling, it's just a snapshot and an example of how within the US, all the different states, these things can vary, and that, again, the burden on the business and trying to figure out that you guys are properly setting and charging within your system. These definitions vary by jurisdiction. It's very complex. product-based tax exemptions and special rates. There's different holidays that factor into it too. All these things, and Makia mentioned earlier about all of our software solutions are cloud-based. It's in real time when that makes that determination and calculation for it. It's all done in real time through that Volusion connector. And this is how our ECM, the electronic certificate management, creates intelligent. It integrates with AvidTax, our tax engine, other invoicing platforms, websites, and other tax engines for that real-time verification, collects them digitally, manages by customer, state, and PO, all in a secure cloud-based solution, automate expiration notices, so you don't have any kind of delay in business or inconvenience to the customer. It'll automate that expiration notices for you and the client, and to be able to respond to audits quickly by having all these stored in one location. Those digital files that we're able to keep with all these certificates, if you in the case do get audited, it makes it a lot easier to pull all that data together. All right, some different challenges. We're almost done with the certificate part of the presentation, but Nexus is often not well understood. I know we went through it earlier for about 5 minutes or so, if that's again, high level overview, but I guarantee I'd be surprised if there weren't still some questions about Nexus and how it might be affecting you. It's just, it's complicated. I've been with the company for 5 years and I still learn stuff, on a daily and weekly basis about sales tax in the US. So it can be difficult for a business to keep up with everything. And then omni-channel points of sale, employees oftentimes are not well trained to validate their certificates. There's also the human error. They might miss something. And then you have the certificate expiration, tracking and updating in all these expired certificates. There's some states where they do expire, and there's a lot of states where they don't. And then just that retrieval time is time consuming and hard. And then, as I talked about audits before, a single missing certificate could actually end up costing you much more than the taxes you failed to collect, just in fines and penalties that they can assess for an incorrect certificate. All right, we're going to get into the next challenge, which is calculating that right tax amount. So commerce has never been so vibrant as it is today. We all know this. It's not going to reverse trend. It's going to keep going in the same direction. Omni-channel sales, marketplaces, e-commerce sales, remote sales, all these things factor in, and you can see just the number, 96% of mid-sized businesses have changed as a result of COVID. Just a shift in like new revenue streams, new products, selling to resellers, whatever it is, businesses are trying to think of new and exciting ways for their business to profit and operationally grow in an efficient manner, and automating those processes like we're talking about today through our solution and through Volusion is a great option to look into. If you're having to do a lot of this process manually, we could take that burden off of you. This is a great slide here. It shows an example of Colorado. You talk about the different tax jurisdictions throughout the US. This is a good example. We say all the time at Avalara that the zip code is for the Postal Service, not for tax calculation, because as you can see here, just in this small area, there's 6 different zip codes here, but you can see all the different shading, right? So that just represents a different tax rate for that shaded area. And you can see how close some of these are. So looking up rates by zip code is the point here is just not the best option to do that. What our software does when it makes the tax determination is it geolocates it down to the rooftop where that tax determination needs to take place, whether it's remote sales in a physical location in a POS environment. What it'll do is it geolocates that down to give us the most accurate determination and result. So there's no guesswork. 13,000 different tax jurisdictions in the US. This is the other trivia question I always use, along with the one Makia gave earlier, and you can see hers is in here too. The 97,000 rate and taxability updates. But yes, there are 13,000 different jurisdictions just within the United States, and 1,800 different rules. So most of you know this, if you're having to deal with sales tax and use tax, that this can be straining on the business. on your staff, just the risk of being compliant, the time spent researching all this stuff, and then you still don't know if it's being done accurately and correctly. Where's the data being pulled from? Is how much do you trust that data? So what Avalara does with our solution is anytime there's one of these changes that comes down, we recognize it in real time and our software is updated, so it alleviates the concern and the burden of having to do that. All right, Avalara AvaTax. This is what I alluded to earlier, was how we started the company with our AvaTax, which is our tax calculation engine. So automated tax bill data entry, checks sourcing rules, jurisdictional assignment, checks the taxability of the product, and then it stores all that data. So when you need to report, all that data can be aggregated and reported easier, transferred over to returns, whether you're filing the returns or whether we're doing that for you. All that data is there. It's much easier to aggregate, pull it together, and make the returns process simpler. What does this do? It reduces your risk of exposure. It simplifies the tax research and maintenance, which I've talked about. And then it reduces the implementation time and cost through integration. So along the lines is a graph which I like to show. This shows the different sub-second process that takes place when you generate an invoice and hit purchase. If you have AvaTax through Volusion, what it does is it right away it validates the address and or corrects it if it needs to be. It checks the sourcing rules, whether it's origin, destination, or hybrid. Then it assigns the applicable jurisdiction, checks whether the customer is exempt or not. These are all things that we've been talking about throughout this presentation, the last 25 minutes. Identifies product taxability, verifies there's no tax holiday, or if there is, what that is. Applies all these tax rules and regulations, and then it sends that correct sales tax back to the checkout. This is all happening in real time. Volusion's connector is calling our API. It's getting all this information sub-second, and it's applying that back. And then what it does is it stores that info for future remittance, be able to aggregate all that data, which we'll talk about in a little bit here with filing and returns. And it just makes it much simpler. All right, keeping track of changing regulations. So tax research, we offer some tools for this as well. This just shows you an example of, businesses spend 19 hours per month on average, and many are much more than that per month on just sales and use tax research, looking at these rates, making sure they're doing everything correctly. All the things that we've been talking about throughout the presentation, this just puts that burden on that business, your accounting team, whoever's having to do that. And again, I always like to say that a lot of that time spent is just on non-revenue generating tasks that your team could be focused on other areas of the business to help out and not be spending time here. Identifying what your company buys and sells and how different states define that. Finding relevant tax laws to determine that taxability and why the tax rate is what it is, and then applying the laws to your business, purchases, and sales. So we talked throughout about highly regulated industries. Locating and understanding tax laws can be confusing just to the sheer lack of uniformity across different Department of Revenue websites. It's just hard to know which data can be trusted and if any changes have happened, and it just makes it difficult to have to spend that time. Tax compliance requires keeping track of all tax types, of which sales and use tax is often the most challenging and time consuming. If your business does decide to outsource the tax research component to a third party, that can be costly. Some of the benefits of this Avalara tax research that you'll benefit from if you have this solution is just understanding when and why you should charge tax and how much. Be able to keep up with changing tax laws and rates. This makes it much easier. Answer any tax questions from your customers, vendors, and colleagues. And then be able to ask questions and tax experts and usually get an answer within as little as 48 hours. So anything you're having to look up, this Avalara tax research tool will simplify that for you, and it's coming from a trusted source, and you just have that data for you. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about consumer use tax, AvaTax for accounts payable. Consumer use tax, if you're having to do that, is a very difficult, specific, unique challenge for businesses. And I think one of the main reasons why it can be so difficult is because a lot of the process in paying use tax is self-assessment for the business. It's a very manual, resource-intensive process. You know, for the use tax can be very complicated and it varies per state. If you're purchasing a group of, let's say, laptops in one state and you have remote employees or shipping those out, they're being used in another state, there's going to be a difference in tax rates with those states. So the businesses the burden is on them. So look all that up, make sure they're getting it right, assess what amount is owed for the use tax, and then file and remit those returns for that. And these rules and rates are very complex and they're subject to change. You know, the integration and automation can be very difficult. It comes from many sources. And just the data management surrounding use tax can be very difficult. And like I said, with the exemption certificate management piece, audit risks for use tax are very high. All right, the last challenge we're going to get into as we come to the bottom of the hour here is just filing returns and remitting the tax. And we've talked a little bit about this throughout the presentation, but just, you know, remitting that sales tax back to the tax authority, this is a very time-consuming process, filling out the, you know, whether it's paper or online remittance, varying remittance due dates, prepayments. There's often sometimes states will have offered discounts to businesses for prepayments. So just keeping up with how that works and how that schedule works. That actual handling of tax notices can be very time consuming, just having to handle all that process and then filing in local jurisdictions. There's many states out there that have requirements, some weekly, some monthly, quarterly, annually, to file in those local jurisdictions as well as the state level. And then there's obviously late payment fees and multiple payment methods. So in the payment process for filing returns is a process in itself, right? Trying to figure out, you know, how to avoid those late payment fees, different payment methods. You know, each tax authority just has very unique requirements around remitting it back to them. So you need to make sure that process and that filing schedule is in line with exactly how they're requiring it. And then, you know, an important point there at the bottom is sales tax returns have to include all that data, aggregated data across all sales channels. So are you processing POS? Or are you doing OMS system, ERP system, e-commerce platform? Like, depending on where you're selling and where that data lives within your different system, Avalara, you know, again, through Volusion and our partnership with them, can help that process and make sure that those invoices that are being generated in Volusion system are all being stored easily for this process of remitting it back to the authorities. All right, we just reviewed this, and just again, just the different systems there, the different data sources. What we can do is aggregate and pull all that data together just to make everything much simpler for you when you do file, or we file for you. And our managing returns filing, so 1,000+ jurisdictions, hundreds of different forms. You know, we'll always have the latest forms, or do you always have the latest forms if you're not using Avalara? The due dates vary by state. A couple different examples here, but they do vary depending on what the state requires. And then, like I mentioned a minute ago, the filing schedules vary. Some are monthly, some are quarterly, some are annually. It just all depends on the state and what they require. So timely filing discounts and late filing penalties. You know, some have mandatory online filing. There's website changes. You know, just coordinating that filing and payment is what takes up a lot of time, and then that proof of filing and remittance in case you do get audited. All right, so how Avalara, again, through Volusion and our partnership with them and their connector into our system, can help with these challenges. For the beverage alcohol industry, you can see some of the things that the statistics of what we've been able to do from a company standpoint in our BevAlc solution. 29.3 million in tax remittance in 2020 for our beverage alcohol, 53,000 beverage alcohol returns filed, and then registrations and licenses that we've been able to help companies with as well. So for the bev alc industry, and then also for this one, for the energy, tobacco, and vape, these slides are very similar. Basically what it does is, it's as complicated and as the industry can be, and just keeping up with everything and all the different regulations, and then just the cost and the severe penalties of getting it wrong, especially for these industries. This will reduce the risk, just calculates all that sales and use tax, any kind of markup tax, state and local excise taxes, liquor by the drink tax, whatever that is, our solution will determine that for you and make sure that you are staying compliant. It drives efficiency for the business. You just have that centralized system of record that eliminates the need to work across multiple solutions or having to do it manually. And just increasing your compliance, just making sure everything is streamlined. It's the most efficient process for the business. You guys are doing everything in terms of efficiency and operation standpoint to make the business successful and profitable. And same thing for vape and tobacco and energy. We have a software designed for the largest oil, gas, and chemical companies to smaller fuel distributors, energy traders, mobile refuelers, and much more. Same kind of 3 bullet points from the previous slide, just reducing that risk, driving efficiency, and then just, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is that your customers are happy. So if these solutions are able to help your process and make your customers happy, then it's a win-win-win for everybody. All right, coming up on the end here, this is the slide, all the different products and services that we do offer. That third row is our integrations and APIs. We have all those different systems. We have over 1,500 different integrations that are pre-built. And again, special shout out to the Volusion team for building one of those connectors into our system and maintaining that connector. And they're just such a great team to work with. And we appreciate the partnership and anything we can do to provide this service to their clients to help your guys' business process to make things better and more profitable and just easier. That's what we're in partnership with Volusion to do. Some different things at the bottom there. We talked about the sales tax risk assessment. The core products we spent the most time on today, the exemption certificates, the tax calculation piece, which is that AvaTax, and then the reports, returns, and filings. This is a really good report that we're going to end with. Happy to share this full report with you as well, but Forrester actually commissioned a report on Avalara customers. Really some interesting statistics over here, which I'm going to kind of walk through and just read out. Avoiding 510 hours annually just on managing, streamlining, and filing their tax returns. That last challenge that we talked about, 510 hours per year. And this is the average Avalara customer saving. 416 hours of work each year in exemption certificates saved, time saved maintaining those, gaining 85% efficiency in case of audit preparation, and saving 34 hours of your labor per audit. It's eliminating spending on third-party tax experts, saving an average of $150,000 annually, and avoiding and recapturing 90% of tax research work, saving 384 hours annually. I just think this is a really cool report. It just highlights a lot of different ways that we can help clients, and that's what we're here for today. We're here to help streamline this process for Volusion clients. Again, I'll reiterate that this last slide I'm going to pull up here has my email address on here. Makia has been monitoring chat. She'll probably throw her email address in there as well. Either one of us is great to reach out to if you have further questions, or we'll do some live Q&A now. Reach out to your Volusion representative. They know how to get a hold of myself and Makia or David. We're always happy to talk to Volusion clients and see how we can help. Really appreciate your time today. Hope this information was beneficial and helpful, and I'm sure there's questions. Like I said, we try to go into as much as we can without going into too many crazy details. We're happy to get more granular. It's beneficial to do that because every business is different. Your jurisdictions are different. Your taxes vary depending on your products. So we're happy to do that, whether it's a call just to kind of check in, see how you guys are managing all your obligations now, show you some of the different options that we can offer through Volusion, and see if it makes sense for you in the business. So with that, I appreciate your time. gonna let David jump in here and go over some of the questions that came in and see if there's any more before we hop off.
Yeah, Darren, that was great. Thank you so much for taking us through that. We have had a few questions come in. I know some have been answered in the chat, but just wanted to go through a couple more since we've got 3 minutes left. The first one is, if I'm selling in multiple channels, do I need multiple Avalara solutions to track my obligations?
I can answer that. So no, the answer is you would really just need one Avalara account. Darren had mentioned earlier that we've got over 1,000 integrations. So depending on whatever solutions you're using, so if you're using Volugen and you're invoicing out of, let's say, QuickBooks as well, or like a different solution, we would basically provide you with the integrations and they'll all connect to the one account that you have with Avatax. If you have multiple entities, so let's say you've got like, 4 or 5 different entities, you could do that as well. You could use the one account with Avatax and then set it up for all the different multiple entities, and each entity will have its own tracking capabilities for Nexus footprint, filing schedules, and just the tax determinations.
Thanks, Makia.
Mhm.
Something you
Yeah,
said,
thank you.
something you said there made me think of something I usually mention with that map that I showed up earlier, and that Makia just mentioned as far as your Nexus footprint. The great thing about that, tracking that Nexus and trying to determine where you're obligated at, is when you have Avalara solution through Volugen, you'll have a login in a portal and a heat map, which will show you where you're currently registered, where you've hit that 80% mark, which is where we recommend you start looking into getting registered. So it just makes that tracking all those Nexus obligations so much simpler.
Mhm.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. The next one we've got is, how bad is it to wait for them to find me if we have Nexus but don't register?
Um, do you want me to take this one, Darren?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Okay. It's funny that you mentioned that, David, because we do have a lot of conversations with people who did get caught and they regret getting caught, and wish that they had a solution like Avatax prior to getting, caught. But we just say, obviously, this is a business decision, right? I mean, we have a solution for you guys. We want to make sure that you are compliant so that if anyone does come knocking at your door, you are, in the best possible place, right? What we do say though, and what we do see is that if you are facing an audit in one state, auditors do tend to speak to each other, and it's possible that they might communicate and have other states knocking at your door as well. So we just want to make sure that you guys are in the best state possible if and when they do come knocking at your door. Most of the time, they know who we are. So most of the time, if they know that you're partnered with Avalara, you're pretty much compliant. They might just look at a few things and head out. I don't want to make any promises, but that's typically what we do see.
Awesome. Thanks, Makia. Well,
Mhm.
that brings us to time, and that was our last question. So wonderful timing. Thank you all so much for being with us today. And like Darren and Makia said, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. You've got Darren's email right there, and Makia's in the chat. You can also reach out to your Volugen rep for more information, but we really appreciate your time and we'd love to talk more. So if you have any feedback about what you'd like to see us prepare for our next webinar, please let us know. We'd be happy to bring you some more relevant information. And we are looking forward to talking to you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.